Well, hi, Byrnese.
Hello.
It is great to be back with you and all of our listeners on the Lectionary Lounge. Week two, we're killing it.
Yes. Yeah. Listen, we're having a good time.
I like to think so. How did your sermon go last week?
Well, I did talk about the things that I said I was going to talk about.
Okay.
Um, and we'll probably get into this more later. But I also ended up talking a lot about kind of the current events.
hmm
Last Wednesday, there was a mass casualty event. There was a school shooting at a high school in Georgia.
hmm
And on Saturday, there was another a shooting in Maryland where
hmm
a 15-year-old boy died at school. And so I ended up spending a pretty good chunk of my sermon time talking about that, talking about kind of the Moravian Church, our relationship to and position on the Second Amendment and responsible gun ownership and all of those things. So I did preach on James,
Okay.
and part of the application of preaching on James was talking to our current moment in a challenging way. So I
hmm
think it went okay.
hmm
My congregation appreciated and expressed that they were grateful to be able to have that conversation and to be able to talk about those things. But yeah, it's never an easy thing to talk about.
No, I definitely started my sermon earlier this week than I've typically done, and felt like I had to kind of go back to the drawing board towards the end of the week. And so yeah, also spent time just, I don't know how you couldn't really spend time on that. I think especially with the James text that we had last week, this whole really, your faith should cause you to do something and to love your neighbors. And so, yeah, I also spent time addressing the grief and the sorrow and the anger and the pain that just bubbles to the surface every single time we see headlines like these. And when they happen to people maybe that we know or that we are connected to, because that is certainly more and more common. And yeah, it's a heartbreaking time. And yet, trying to find the empowerment in James's text, saying, really, you can do something. Your faith can point you to action. All of the ills of this world do not have to paralyze us. We do have an answer, and it is practicing our faith in ways that tangibly allow us to love our neighbors in whatever way that looks like in our context.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys also, this past week, you did a love feast.
We did. Yes, we are bringing back a lot of our fall programming and ministries here at Calvary. And so, one of the ways that's in the culture of our church to do that is to have a love feast, because in the Moravian tradition, this is a meal where we get together during the service and enjoy sugar cake or love feast buns, depending on your church. We here at Calvary use sugar cake, and it always brings people out of the woodwork. So it was fun to see some faces that I hadn't seen in a bit. And hopefully, we'll get to keep seeing them now that we've got a little bit more going on than we do in the summertime.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The return to the program year is no joke.
No joke. Definitely feel like I'm firing on all cylinders right now.
It's interesting. So my church context, we are a much smaller congregation. We
hmm
actually don't do any additional programming at all. The only thing that we resume is choir, and I am
Mm,
grateful to not have anything to do with that. We have a fantastic choir director, minister of music, Griffin, and he takes care of that. Thank goodness.
awesome.
So I haven't really been extra busy with church programming, but there are a lot of things going on kind of in the life of my congregation, in the lives of the members of my congregation. And it's certainly, yeah, it's an interesting time of year, interesting moment in the life of our church. And I'm sure I'll be able to talk about that more in the future. But for
Mhm.
this, yeah, I'm grateful to be in James for this kind of time in our congregational life.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue, I think. So, what are you going to be preaching on this upcoming Sunday?
Oh, that's a great question. I better check.
Do you think you're going to stay in the James text?
Yes, I am staying in the James text. This Sunday
Okay.
is the 15th. So we have communion this Sunday.
Okay.
The James text for the week is James 3, 1 through 12. I
Okay.
think I'm going to expand the pericope a little bit. Hold on.
Yeah, I
Hebrews,
could see wanting to do that.
James, 1st and 2nd Peter.
Gotta love those old Sunday school songs
It's
to
got
help
to
you
be
remember.
20 years that I've been singing that
Oh,
at this
at
point.
least, at least. I remember using that song to help me get through Bible college and needing to do like a pop quiz of all the books of the Bible. Humming that song in my head.
Okay, yeah. So last week, the pericope ended at James 17. And so this week it begins at James, or we ended at James 2:17. And this week we begin at 3, verse 1. So that misses the whole section 18 through 26,
Ah,
which I actually really feel is a conversation that I need to have with my congregation. So I will definitely be either shifting or expanding the pericope here. And it's all related. So the where we ended the text last week is that verse, faith without works is dead. And the section in the second chapter really continues. It kind of looks at different characters in the Hebrew Bible stories who demonstrate their faith by their actions. One of the verses I really do think we need to explore a little bit more is verse 18. Now, some may argue, and I'm reading out of the New Living Translation, some may argue some people have faith, others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds. That is really kind of the theme of what we're exploring in James this month, and it's the outgrowth of what we've been exploring as a congregation for the past couple of months. Moving our faith from an intellectual idea, from a set of beliefs to our heart. So moving from our brain to our heart, and now moving that experience, our feelings, our thoughts, into the way we actually live in the world. So I do want to kind of talk about that a little bit, look at kind of some of the stories that are shown here in this text. I'm not sure how much time I will spend in the third chapter because it is really an example of what they're talking about in the second chapter. It's talking about, controlling the tongue, controlling your speech as an expression of the works of faith. I don't know.
yeah.
What do you think? What are you going to preach on?
Uh, I I think you're right. I think that as James jumps into this taming of the tongue, which is the start of chapter 3, really, when you read it continually from chapter 2, I think it helps set in context that this idea of remembering our words matter and how not just what we say, but even the thoughts that we have about the words that we say. Reading it in context with those verses that kind of get just left aside between these two preaching weeks, I think is helpful to remember. Well, this isn't just James being like, do this, do that. It is really a response of your faith should be informing how you act. And I think I read Barbara Brown Taylor commentary on this passage saying that for James, the act of speech is a Christian practice. And in a day and age where maybe we don't always think about being Christians before we speak, especially online
Mhm.
or, when we can hide behind a computer screen, I think that's a really necessary conversation to have. I'm not totally sure what I'm preaching on yet this week. I was thinking, James, and I really like your idea of expanding the pericope, so I might do that. But the Mark text is also very intriguing to me this week. So it's Mark 8:27 through 38, I believe, or roughly that passage. I'll read it because it's pretty short, and I'm reading from the Common English Bible, and you can help me bounce around some ideas maybe.
Yes, that's good.
So, Jesus and his disciples went into the villages near Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They told him, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "And what about you? Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Christ." Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then Jesus began to teach his disciples, "The human one must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the legal experts, and be killed, and then after 3 days rise from the dead." He said this plainly, but Peter took hold of Jesus and scorned him, began to correct him. Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, then sternly corrected Peter. "Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts." After calling the crowd together with his disciples, Jesus said to them, "All who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. All who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me and because of the good news will save them. Why would people gain the whole world but lose their lives? What will people give in exchange for their lives? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this unfaithful and sinless generation, the human one will be ashamed of that person when he comes in the Father's glory with the holy angels."
Okay. That is a
Yeah,
text.
it is a text, and I always appreciate reading it when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And I think that that is something we should be asking more. Who do we say? And therefore, maybe, who do we believe Jesus to be? Who do we believe God to be? And how does that inform our actions?
And our
How does that
expectations.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Our expectations. I think that that's what Peter is really wrestling with in this text. He gets it in a way, right? He says, "You are the Christ." Other texts, I think, say you're the Messiah. And yet he takes hold of Jesus. And I also love that the like physicality. When we imagine these two as dear friends, really more like brothers in so many ways, probably, then Peter hears Jesus describe what will unfold, and he doesn't like what he hears. It does not meet his expectation for what the Christ is in his mind. And so he physically takes hold of Jesus and is kind of like, "No." And Jesus is like, "My dude, you're not paying attention." And I think in many ways we do the same thing with God, right? We're like, "That didn't meet my expectation." And God is like, "I'm asking you to trust me and listen to all of what I say and not get caught up in the first part and miss something else that I think is really important for you to know."
Well,
But yeah.
that's so interesting to think about too, because like Jesus has this relationship with the disciples, this rabbi,
Mhm.
student, disciple relationship. And to think about kind of these two texts, almost like a tale of two brothers.
Yeah.
You have the
Oh, okay.
relationship with Jesus and Peter, um,
Mhm.
and then you have the relationship with Jesus and James. And thinking about the different ways they respond to Jesus, like these two young men. And these texts are not, they weren't writing this down in real time. So it's a lot of
No.
reflecting back at these stories, at these people, and filtering things through the years and the wisdom and the experience and
Mhm.
all that stuff. But thinking, yeah, kind of thinking about, I think James as a character is really a part of the book of James in the way that we don't know the author of Hebrews.
Mhm.
So their lack of backstory, their lack of context kind of makes them less of a character. Um, with the book of James being attributed traditionally to James, Jesus' brother, the experience, the person, all of that kind of factors into, I think, the way that we read, interpret, and understand the text. And so thinking about that, and then also thinking about Mark and this story about Peter, yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And there's definitely a tie-in with, right, the words that we say between the two texts. And how does what we believe inform what we say? There is this controversial part of the text in Mark where Jesus calls Peter Satan. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, part of me is always like, I don't want to. Is a sermon the right time to address something like that? Or is that better left to a adult Sunday school class or a midweek Bible study? Because that alone could take such a large amount of time to address for folks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I'm waffling between these two texts, I think, from the lectionary selections. Maybe we'll see about having both of them read. I don't know. But I do like the idea. I think I wrestled with the James text this week, mostly because it felt incomplete, which is always the case, right? Because we're not reading the whole thing in its entirety. But just this talk of taming the tongue, of, you know, horse bridles and fresh water from saltwater springs and grapevines producing figs. I was like, that's so the clarity is lacking,
Mm-hmm.
which is often, I think, a problem with James when we read it in small chunks. But expanding the pericope could help with that and keep the framing of our acts matter and how we practice our faith informs those acts in our everyday lives in something that we often see as simple as just the words that we say to each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it remains a challenging and timely message, especially I think they couldn't the lectionary isn't written for Americans. It's not selected.
No.
Like these texts were selected, I feel like probably generations ago.
Yeah.
By who knows where. I don't. But through the work of the Spirit, the lectionary often becomes a really timely challenge to our
Mm-hmm.
context and our world. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that this conversation around taming the tongue, we are in a very contentious election cycle where people do not have a ton of interest in minding what the words they're saying about other people. Like from pundits and politicians and talking heads all the way down to us, our colleagues, our congregations, everyone. This is a challenge for us as a people and a community sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, the challenge is there. It's in the text, and it's always timely.
Yes. And, verse 1 in chapter 3 is one that I don't think we can avoid. My brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers because we know that we teachers will be judged more strictly. And certainly, whether or not, how we feel about being put in that category, I think our congregations would say, yeah, if you're standing behind the pulpit, whether you're our pastor or a lay preacher or a guest preacher, you are a teacher. And just as we sit with this text, something to sit with is that responsibility that comes with being in a position of teaching, and also to invite our congregations in to think of all the areas in their life where they are leaders, right? Whether it's leaders of their family, leaders at work, leaders at their local, Lions Club or women's knitting circle or whatever it might be. In what ways do
Absolutely.
you step into a place of authority, place of leadership? And do we remember that that is a place of privilege to be in? And so we need to take it seriously because there are people that are counting on all of us to allow our faith to guide our words in ways that build one another up and not tear one another down, that don't stray from challenge, right? James himself is very challenging. I think of the text that we just had this past week, and he pulls no punches. Like your faith is dead if you do not do something with it. That is that is challenging to hear, I think, in this day and age, especially, but I'm sure it was challenging when the first readers heard this read aloud. And so it's not that we don't challenge one another, that we don't push one another, especially when it's to try and help us become more like the Jesus we profess to love and to follow, but doing so in a way that honors the God who loves us, who created us, who lived incarnationally as an act of radical love for us. I think that is a very important message for me as a pastor and a preacher to hear, just even like for myself, but I would hope it would also be for my congregation as well.
Absolutely. Well, sweet. This last week, I felt having this conversation at the beginning of the week did set me up to be more successful when I went to write my sermon. So thanks for taking the time to do this with me. I would love to know, Mikayla, what is keeping you from writing your sermon this week?
Oh, I feel like there's going to be many things. Uh, this past week, the weather was amazing, and I felt like I became a totally new person in the best of ways. Had all my windows open. It felt like fall. Absolutely love that. It's still kind of that way today. I think it might be little bit tomorrow, but the weather is probably going to get a little warm, which I knew. Fall's a thing in early September. But if this good weather continues, that will definitely keep me from writing my sermon in a timely manner because I'm just going to want to be outside. The other thing is, you know, not to get into the weeds about it, but this week we do have a presidential debate, and regardless of how one feels about the candidates, I think just the rising stress levels of knowing that this is such a contentious time and caring for folks, whether it's congregation members, friends, family, that fall on all points on the spectrum politically, knowing that relationships are going to be tense following this debate, leading up to this debate, and that online discourse and dialogue is going to kind of go off the charts, I'm sure will probably keep me in my head thinking about that and keep me from writing my sermon as early as I would like to. What about you?
Yeah, last week I talked about stoles popping off, and
Yes.
it has not really slowed down.
No.
It, I was really, really fortunate last week. I found a embroidery machine, like a
Mm.
digital embroidery machine, on eBay. And I took a risk. I ordered this machine from a scrapper on eBay, and it came, and you and I set it up, and it's brand new. Like a brand new $1,000 embroidery machine. I did not pay that. I could never pay that. But that came, and we got it set up on Friday night. And so Saturday morning, when I got a message at 6 o'clock in the morning from someone in the community in Maryland that had the school shooting, requesting a custom stole for that moment, to respond, to be able to do community care. There is, I learned about from this person, a like a visual icon, basically like an imagery that's now kind of being associated with anti-gun violence, liturgical wear, I guess. So orange is not a liturgical color. We have the different liturgical seasons in the church. We've got Advent, we've got Lent. So we've got, our different liturgical colors for those seasons. And of them, orange is missing. Orange is not a liturgical color. So some people have, over the past couple of years, developed this visual tradition of creating orange stoles to stand against gun violence.
Mm.
So I got an order to do a custom orange stole with a very, very quick turnaround on Saturday morning, because I have this machine that literally got here like 12 hours earlier, I
Mhm.
was able to say yes. I was able to say, yes, I will get this done. I will send it to you. It's currently drying right now, and am going to try to get it sent in the mail in an hour or so. And I think that I'll probably end up working on a couple more of those this week, a couple of other custom orders that I have,
Mhm.
and that'll keep me really busy. Plus, I'm kind of a full-time student,
Not
and
kind of, you are a
yeah,
full-time student.
and the semester is really starting to pick up. We're now getting into mid-September, so I have papers to
Mhm.
write and projects to do and all those sorts of things. So that will keep me busy, keep me from writing my sermon until probably Saturday night again.
Oh boy. Yeah. No, if you are listening and you're curious about these stoles, I do highly recommend that you check out Pastor Byrnese on Instagram, or your Etsy shop is Sourdough and Sacrament, I
It
believe.
is sourdough and sacrament.
And yeah, she's doing some really incredible work. And I've seen a picture of this orange stole, and it's wonderful. I think the pastor who will be receiving it will be very grateful for your talents and quick turnaround on this as he cares for the community that he serves that's grieving right now.
Absolutely. I do have to say, I almost put a call out to the Moravian mail system. This church is only about 2 hours south of us. They're on like in like northern
Oh.
Maryland. So like between
Mhm.
here and Baltimore. And so I almost put out on Facebook, like, hey, are any of my colleagues headed towards Baltimore? Anyone, driving down to Maryland on Monday? Can I send something with you? The Moravian church is notorious for having a well-developed unofficial postal service.
Yes, whether you need a stole delivered or a whole person, possible we could get you there with Moravian Mail.
It's true. It's true.
Well, Bernice, this was wonderful. I'm so grateful to gather with you in this lectionary lounge and have practical conversations. We both have Masters of Divinities. You're working on yours. And so, we're baby biblical scholars, baby pastors, but really just trying to have these conversations about the practical ways in which scripture informs our life and how we can bring that to the pulpit. So grateful as always to have these conversations with you each week.
Yeah. And, we both believe these conversations are not reserved to pastors.
No.
Like every, thoughtful Christian people at all different levels of education, it's not even just Christian people, thoughtful,
Mhm.
faithful people from so many
Mhm.
different traditions are having these conversations every week,
Mhm.
exploring the implications of their faith and their values on their life. And so we just get to join into that great stream of wisdom and knowledge and experience. And I'm glad to be able to do that with you.
All right, everyone. Have a great week. If you're writing a sermon, good luck. Hopefully, you can get it done before Saturday, like we're hoping to. And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.